Have you ever felt like you're trying hard to prove something to someone who no longer deserves your energy? Have you ever stayed silent, not because you're weak, but because you've grown strong enough not to respond? And what if I told you, forgiveness isn't about letting them off the hook. It's about setting yourself free. Welcome. I know that feeling, the quiet storm inside when you've been hurt, yet you choose to rise, not for them, but for your own peace. Not everyone deserves to hear your story, and real strength, it doesn't scream, it doesn't chase, it simply rises, far above the noise. Revenge isn't in reacting, it's in transforming, living so fully, so gracefully, that they can't even recognize you anymore. That's not arrogance, that's clarity. Stoicism doesn't teach us to suppress, it teaches us to choose, to respond, not react, to guard our peace like it's sacred. In today's video, I'll walk you through the timeless insights that help you not just move on, but rise stronger, freer, and more untouchable than ever before. If that's the path you're on, I invite you to subscribe, and let's grow through this together. Not everyone deserves your story. The Stoic power of quiet strength. I want you to imagine something with me. You're sitting across from someone, maybe a friend, maybe a colleague, maybe even a partner, and they ask you, why did you pull away? They don't ask with curiosity, they ask with accusation. And in that moment, your instinct is to explain, to defend, to lay out every detail of what happened, hoping, maybe foolishly, that this time they'll understand. But instead, you pause, you take a breath, and you say nothing, not because you're afraid, not because you don't have the words, but because you've finally realized something most people take a lifetime to learn. Not everyone deserves your story. There's a quiet kind of power that lives in restraint, in choosing silence not as surrender, but as self-respect. I've felt it. Maybe you have too. That moment where you know you could unpack everything, but you also know it won't change a thing. That's the fork in the road between reaction and wisdom. See, we live in a world that worships the performance of truth, where people spill their hearts in comments, captions, and conversations not because it brings healing, but because they crave validation. And sometimes, telling your story feels like begging to be seen, to be believed, to be justified. But here's the hard truth. The more you feel the need to explain yourself to people who've already decided who you are, the more power you give away. And some people, let's be honest, don't want your truth. They just want your vulnerability as ammunition for later. I once knew a man named Richard. He was in his early 60s, a Vietnam vet turned carpenter, salt and pepper, hair, thick hands, and a heart you could feel when he spoke. He told me a story once about a friend who betrayed him during a business deal. A man he'd known for 20 years. It cost him nearly everything, his trust, his money, his peace. But what struck me wasn't the betrayal itself. It was what Richard didn't do. He didn't confront. He didn't scream. He didn't post vague quotes online about snakes in the grass. He said, I just walked, took my tools, closed the shop, left the keys on the table, never said a word. And when I asked him why, he looked me dead in the eye and said something I'll never forget. When a man shows me who he is, I don't negotiate. I listen. That's Stoicism, not the cold, emotionless mask people mistake it for, but the radical inner strength of choosing peace over performance. Because silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's wisdom refusing to waste its breath. In psychological studies, researchers have found that people with high emotional intelligence don't always respond immediately in conflict. They pause, they assess, they consider whether a response is even worth the energy. And more often than not, it isn't. The Stoics knew this centuries ago. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome and author of Meditations, wrote, the best revenge is to be unlike him who caused the injury. He didn't say to win the argument. He didn't say to prove your worth. He said, be different, be better, be quiet enough to rise. So let me ask you something. Have you ever told your story to the wrong person? Have you ever opened up, hoping they'd see your side, and all they did was twist your words into weapons? It's okay. We all have, but there comes a point in life, usually after enough pain, where you learn that your silence doesn't need to be explained. It becomes sacred. A boundary, a declaration that says, I know who I am, and I don't owe you access to my soul. There's a myth that if we don't speak up, we're weak. But sometimes, choosing not to explain is the ultimate sign of strength, because it means you've detached your peace from someone else's approval. You no longer need to be understood to be okay. You no longer require vindication to sleep. Well, at night, you walk away not to escape, but to protect what's still healing inside you. That's not cowardice. That's emotional maturity. A therapist friend once told me something profound. She said, in every conversation, ask yourself, am I being heard, or am I being judged? If it's the second, leave. And that stuck with me, because most of the time, the people who demand an explanation from you aren't asking to understand. They're asking to validate their own narrative. So what do? How do we stay soft, and yet guarded? How do we honor our story without giving it away to people who will only use it against us? Here's what the Stoics would say. You tell your story through your actions, through your presence, through your peace. You don't need to yell it from the rooftops. You don't need to convince anyone of your value. You live in a way that makes your healing undeniable, and your silence sacred. Seneca wrote, sometimes even to live is an act of courage. And I think sometimes, to stay silent, to walk away without bitterness, to keep your heart soft after betrayal, that too is courage. So if you're in a place right now where you feel like explaining yourself, like defending who you are, like proving your intentions, let me offer you this. You don't owe them that. You owe you peace. You owe you rest. You owe you the freedom to walk through life without dragging the weight of other people's confusion. Not everyone is worthy of your story. And that's not cruelty. That's discernment. You can still be kind without being open to everyone. You can still be honest without handing out your soul like a flyer. You can still love fiercely, but with boundaries strong enough to protect what matters most. So the next time you feel the need to explain, remember Richard, remember Marcus, remember yourself, and choose silence, not as surrender, but as sovereignty, because sometimes the loudest power you'll ever speak is the strength to say absolutely nothing at all too. Shining and outgrowing them is the most elegant form of revenge. What if I told you the most elegant form of revenge doesn't come wrapped in confrontation or cloaked in dramatic exits? It's not about clapping back, proving them wrong in front of an audience, or writing a post so sharp it slices through every lie ever spoken about you. The most powerful revenge, the kind that leaves no wounds behind, only wisdom, is quiet, graceful, and invisible to the untrained eye. It's you, shining brighter than ever. It's you, rising so far above the noise, the betrayal, the disappointment, that they can no longer touch you, not because they've stopped trying, but because you've simply grown to far beyond their reach. I want you to picture this. You're walking through your life, weighed down by memories of people who doubted you, dismissed you, maybe even destroyed parts of you they never had the right to touch. There were words said, harsh ones, cutting ones, and for a long time, they lived inside you like ghosts refusing to leave. There was a version of you who wanted to fight back, to make them see, to prove that you were more than what they made you out to be. But here's the truth no one tells you soon enough. The people who hurt you don't need to see your growth to validate it. Their absence from your journey doesn't make the road less real. You don't need witnesses to evolve. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius said, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. That means you don't become bitter because they were cruel. You don't become cold because they were careless. You don't collapse just because they left. You rebuild, and then you rise, but not to impress them, not to seek their acknowledgement or secretly hope they'll regret their choices. You rise because you deserve to live unchained, free from the echo of their actions, free from the version of you that was still stuck in reaction mode. You evolve because your peace matters more than their opinions. Your future matters more than your history with them. And yes, sometimes, growth is loud. You get the job, you build the family, you publish the book, you stand on stages, you speak into rooms, you do all the things they once said you weren't capable of. But even then, your rise is not a billboard pointed in their direction. It's a homecoming to yourself. It's reclaiming all the energy you used to spend trying to be understood by the wrong people and instead using it to build a life That doesn't require an audience. Let me share something with you. Years ago, I knew a woman named Claire. She had just ended a toxic relationship that left her doubting everything. Her worth, her instincts, her dreams. The man she had loved for 3 years told her she was too emotional to succeed, too sensitive to be taken seriously, too dramatic to be loved deeply. At first, Claire tried to defend herself. She fought, she pleaded, she wrote letters she never sent. And then, one morning, she stopped. She deleted his number. She stopped trying to rewrite the ending, and she started writing a new beginning. Instead, without him in it, she went back to school. She started therapy. She launched a small creative business from her garage. It wasn't glamorous at first. No one clapped. No one posted about it. But she kept building. And 3 years later, that same woman was hosting art exhibits across the country. She was happy, fulfilled, at peace. Someone once asked her what she would say to her ex now, if given the chance. Claire smiled and said, "Nothing. I don't need to say anything. My life speaks for itself." That right there is the essence of this idea. Revenge that doesn't roar. It just glows. It doesn't perform. It simply moves forward. It doesn't keep score. It stops playing the game entirely. You see, real revenge isn't about making them feel small. It's about no longer feeling small yourself. It's about releasing the need for them to ever get it. Because the truth is, some people never will. They'll never see the damage they caused, the love they squandered, the words they should have never said. And that's okay. It's not your job to educate them. It's not your job to correct them. It's your job to heal. And healing doesn't look like confrontation. Healing looks like growth. Psychologists will tell you that emotional detachment from harmful relationships is one of the clearest signs of resilience. When you stop needing someone's validation, when you stop checking their profile, rehearsing the argument, replaying the betrayal, that's not weakness, that's liberation. It's your nervous system learning safety again. It's your soul remembering who you are without the filter of their shadow. And it takes time, sometimes years. Sometimes you'll think you've outgrown them, only to hear a song, see a photo, walk past a street, and feel everything again. That's normal. That's grief doing its work. But even then, you're still growing. Because even on the hard days, you're not going back to who you were. You're just visiting the places you left behind, this time with wisdom in your bones. There's something deeply stoic about this form of revenge. It doesn't disrupt. It doesn't demand. It just lives, fully, boldly, without apology. And it invites others, not to envy you, but to respect the quiet power of someone who no longer needs to prove a thing. So, if you're in a place right now where the temptation to react is strong, where you want to respond, reply, retaliate, take a moment, breathe, and ask yourself, does this serve my peace or only my pride? Because pride wants to be right, but peace just wants to be free. Shine, not for them, for you. Rise, not to prove them wrong, to prove to yourself that you were never broken, just buried. And as you rise, let them watch, or let them vanish. Either way, you're winning. Because when you outgrow what tried to hurt you, when you build joy from ruins, when you speak less and become more, that is the most elegant revenge. Not because it hurts them, but because it heals you. Double quotes true. Strength doesn't come from reacting. It comes from conscious response. There's a quiet kind of power that doesn't get enough attention these days. It doesn't shout in arguments, doesn't slam doors, doesn't race to clap back with sharper words or faster replies. It waits, it breathes, it chooses its moment with intention. Or sometimes, chooses not to have a moment at all. We live in a world that praises instant reactions. Someone insults you, fire back. Someone doubts you, prove them wrong. Someone cuts you off, speaks over you, misunderstands you. Make it known, make it loud, make it sting. But in the teachings of Stoicism, there's a different rhythm, a deeper wisdom, one that says, the strongest person in the room is not the one who speaks first, but the one who speaks last, only after they've listened to themselves first. I want you to imagine this. You're sitting across from someone who knows exactly how to push your buttons. Maybe it's a colleague, a partner, even a family member. They say something, a little jab, a loaded phrase, the kind that's meant to hook you. And for a moment, your chest tightens. Your mind races to respond. That fire in your gut is telling you, say something, don't let this slide. But in that exact moment, another voice appears, softer, quieter. It asks you, will this reaction bring peace, or just feed the fire? That voice, that space between stimulus and response, is where your true power lives. Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. But the modern interpretation often misses something. Reaction, in its rawest form, is survival. It's instinct, it's automatic. Response, on the other hand, is maturity, it's presence, it's power. And there's a difference between the two that changes everything. I once knew a man named Thomas. He was a former firefighter, a man of few words and calm eyes. He told me something I'll never forget. The fire doesn't care how you feel. Panic doesn't put it out. Precision does. He wasn't just talking about flames. He was talking about life. Thomas had a son, bright, opinionated, fiercely emotional. They'd argue often, especially when the boy turned 16 and thought he knew everything about the world. One day, the son lashed out during dinner, said something cruel. It wasn't just disrespectful, it was personal, the kind of remark that, if it came from a stranger, you'd never speak to them again. But Thomas didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice or match insult with insult. He looked at his son and said quietly, is that how you really feel? Or is that just what hurt sounds like when it's scared? The table fell silent. That moment changed their relationship, not because Thomas proved a point, but because he chose not to lose himself in a storm that wasn't his. That is strength, not in dominance, not in volume, but in self-possession. When you respond with awareness, when you pause long enough to choose clarity over chaos, you're not giving in, you're rising above, and in doing so, you protect something sacred, your inner equilibrium. Stoicism isn't about being passive. It's not silence as submission, it's restraint as leadership. It teaches that you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to, not because you're afraid, but because you've already won by refusing to be pulled into someone else's war. And it's not always easy. Sometimes the hardest thing in the world is to say nothing, to let the comment pass, to walk away when every part of you wants to stay and prove your side. But that restraint, that pause, it's what separates the wise from the reactive, the stable from the swayed. Psychologists call it response flexibility, the ability to pause and choose your action instead of reacting impulsively. Research shows that people who master this skill have lower stress, healthier relationships, and greater long-term success. Not because life is easier for them, but because they've built the muscle of emotional discipline. In Stoicism, this is the battlefield, not the world outside, but the world within. The real enemy is not the person who criticizes you, but the part of you that believes every insult is worth your energy. The battle is not to silence them, but to silence the need to be validated by them. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, you always own the option of having no opinion. There's never a need to get worked up or to trouble your soul about things you can't control. These things are not asking to be judged by you. Leave them alone. How often do we suffer not because of what was said, but because we decided to carry it all day? How often do we replay a scene in our minds, crafting better comebacks, better versions of ourselves who didn't freeze, didn't retreat, didn't stay silent? But what if that silence wasn't failure? What if it was strength dressed in stillness? When you respond instead of react, you're reclaiming the script. You're refusing to let someone else's chaos write your narrative. And you begin to experience a new kind of freedom. The freedom that comes not from being untouched by others, but from being unmoved by them. I want you to think about the last time you reacted quickly, emotionally, and regretted it. Maybe you yelled. Maybe you sent that message. Maybe you stormed out. And now think about a time you paused, you waited, you breathed. Maybe you even said nothing at all. Which version of you felt stronger? Reaction feels good in the moment. It feels righteous. But response? It's the wisdom that still feels right the next day. So when someone pushes, challenges, mocks, or provokes, don't meet them at their level. Meet them at your depth. Respond like someone who doesn't just want to win an argument, but who wants to win their life back. Let them wonder why they can't shake you. Let them guess what you're thinking. Let them hear your silence and feel the weight of their own noise. Because the moment you stop reacting like everyone else, the moment you start choosing your responses with awareness and intention, you step into a league of your own, and that is where real power begins. For forgiveness isn't because they deserve it, it's because you deserve peace. You've probably heard it said, forgive and forget. But real forgiveness, the kind that takes root deep in your chest, is never about forgetting. It's not about pretending it didn't happen, and it's certainly not about saying, it's okay when it wasn't. Forgiveness is something else entirely. Something quieter. Something harder. Something that has nothing to do with them, and everything to do with you. I want you to imagine this. You're walking through life carrying a heavy rope. It's rough, fraying, and wrapped tight around your own hands. On the other end of that rope, the person who wronged you. Maybe they're walking freely unaware. Maybe they're gone entirely. But as long as you hold on, you're bound. That's what unhealed pain does. It binds you to the very thing that hurt you. Forgiveness is not about letting them off the hook. It's about letting yourself off the hook of reliving it, rethinking it, redefining your worth through what they did. It's not weakness. It's the opposite. It's the courageous decision to say, I will no longer give this the power to steal my sleep, my peace, my present moments. A woman once told me her story over coffee. Let's call her Margaret. She had been betrayed by her sister, not in a small way, but in the kind of way that breaks the foundation of family, trust. Years passed. Margaret kept her distance. She didn't lash out. She didn't scream. But inside she carried it, like a shard of glass pressed against her soul. Every time she thought of her sister, something twisted in her gut. I asked her once, what would it feel like to forgive her? She looked down, took a breath, and said, like dropping a stone I didn't even know I was still carrying. That's the thing. Sometimes the people we haven't forgiven are no longer even in our lives. But the pain, it stays, until we decide to set it down. The Stoics understood this deeply. Seneca, one of the wisest Stoic thinkers, once said, to forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover the prisoner was you. And in those words lies a freedom we often overlook, because we think forgiveness means reconciliation, that it means things go back to the way they were. But let's be clear, forgiveness doesn't mean return. It doesn't mean you have to reopen that door. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do, for both of you, is to forgive and walk away. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, wrote in his Meditations, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. In other words, don't let someone else's cruelty become your story. Don't let their darkness shadow your light. Forgive, not because they earned it, but because you have earned the right to heal. This doesn't mean it's easy. Forgiveness is a process, not a what-I'm declaration. It's not a speech, it's a quiet shift in the heart. It begins not with them, but with you, with your decision to say, I choose peace over poison. I choose release over resentment. And yes, there's a kind of grief in that. A grief that what happened, happened, that you can't rewrite it. That justice may never arrive in the form you imagined. But grief doesn't mean defeat. It means recognition. And in that recognition, healing begins. There's an old Zen saying, holding onto anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It's raw, but it's true. Every time we replay the betrayal, the insult, the abandonment, we reopen the wound. And the only person who suffers is the one reliving it. Forgiveness, then, is not a gift to them. It's a rescue of yourself when you let go, truly let go. It doesn't mean you excuse the behavior. It means you reclaim the right to live your life unchained. You stop letting the past have a vote in your future. You choose to rise, not because they lifted you, but because they couldn't hold you down. I want you to think for a moment. What story have you been carrying? Whose shadow still stretches across your joy? And more importantly, why? Ask yourself, what would my life feel like without this weight? What would your mornings feel like if you didn't start them with old anger? What would your relationships look like if your heart wasn't still guarded by yesterday's pain? You may not get closure from them. Many never do. But here's the hard truth. You don't need their apology to forgive. You need your own permission. Permission to stop bleeding from a cut that someone else gave you. Permission to believe that your peace matters more than your pride. Forgiveness is not a surrender. It's a declaration. This will not define me. I will not live in bitterness. I will not be a monument to my pain. And sometimes, forgiveness is quiet. There's no big conversation, no dramatic ending. Sometimes you forgive with your actions, by not responding, by choosing joy anyway, by living well, by smiling when their name crosses your mind and realizing it no longer controls your breath. Because here's the truth. Some people are chapters, not the whole book. Some lessons hurt, but they sharpen you. Some wounds scar, but they remind you of your resilience. Forgiveness is not forgetting what happened. It's remembering it without anger, without obsession, without letting it own you. It's saying, yes, that happened. Yes, it changed me. But I get to decide how the story goes from here. And maybe that's the most powerful thing of all. 5. Stoicism teaches, do not become like the one who harmed you. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. And if you've ever been betrayed, insulted, or dragged through the mud by someone you once trusted, that line probably feels like a quiet revolution. See, the world often tells us the opposite. It says, stand up for yourself, show them who they messed with, hit back harder, and on the surface, that feels empowering. There's a satisfaction in imagining that final word, that perfect takedown. The look on their face when they realize they couldn't break you. But then what? Because if we're not careful, we become so obsessed with not being defeated that we start to become them. We speak with the same sharp tone they used. We act with the same coldness. We protect ourselves by building walls just like the ones that hurt us in the first place. And here's where Stoicism whispers a different truth, a harder truth. It says, you can't heal if you're busy mirroring the wound. I want to tell you a story. Years ago, I worked with someone, let's call him Greg. He was one of those people who didn't harm you in big ways, but in 1,000 little cuts. He'd take credit for your ideas in meetings. He'd give backhanded compliments that left you feeling small. He was charming to the right people and subtly cruel to everyone else. I watched him do this to others, and eventually, to me. At first, I plotted revenge, not in a dramatic way, but in the small ways people do when they've been hurt. I thought, I'll be just as clever. I'll take my credit back. I'll win this game. And for a moment, it felt like justice. But justice, when laced with ego, tastes bitter. I wasn't sleeping well. I was constantly watching my back. And one morning, looking at myself in the mirror, I realized I don't like who I'm becoming. Because slowly, without noticing, I had adopted his tactics. I was guarded, sarcastic, transactional. I hadn't just tried to beat him. I had started to become like him. And that's when Marcus Aurelius' words hit me differently. Be unlike the one who harmed you, not because you're weak, but because you're free. Because the real revenge isn't sinking to their level. It's rising so high they can't even reach you anymore. That's what Stoicism teaches, that peace is power, and power is in self-mastery. It's not about proving your strength through reaction. It's about choosing your response, choosing your values, choosing your character, especially when someone tries to drag you into theirs. When someone wrongs you, your first instinct will always be defense. That's human. But your second instinct, the one you choose, the one you build over time, that's where your power lives. Think about it. What kind of legacy do you want to leave? Do you want to be remembered as someone who mirrored bitterness, or someone who transformed pain into grace? Nelson Mandela was imprisoned for 27 years by a regime that dehumanized him, and yet, when he was released, he didn't seek revenge. He led with peace. Why? Because he understood that real leadership, real strength, real healing doesn't look like retaliation. It looks like restraint. It looks like forgiveness. It looks like clarity. And to be clear, this doesn't mean you allow abuse. It doesn't mean you don't set boundaries. Stoicism never asks you to be passive. What it asks is that you don't let bitterness define your actions. You don't need to match their darkness to protect your light. Seneca, another great Stoic, said, anger, if not restrained, is frequently more hurtful to us than the injury that provokes it. Let that sink in. Sometimes, the real damage isn't in what they did. It's in what we do to ourselves afterward. By carrying that anger, feeding it, letting it distort how we see the world. So how do we break free? Start here. Ask yourself who you want to be despite what they did. If someone lied to you, can you remain honest? If someone disrespected you, can you hold your dignity? If someone abandoned you, can you show up for yourself? This is not easy work, but it is the most important work, because when you choose not to become like the one who harmed you, you're not just avoiding revenge, you're reclaiming your identity. You're drawing a line between what happened to you and who you choose to be because of it. Imagine living in such a way that your character becomes your protection, that people who tried to diminish you fade into irrelevance, not because you defeated them, but because you outgrew them. That's Stoicism in action. Not coldness, not detachment, but conscious response, deep reflection, and a commitment to live by your values, not by your wounds. The world needs fewer people who mirror harm. It needs more people who choose integrity when it's hardest, who choose peace when chaos is more tempting, who choose to stand quietly and powerfully in their own truth, regardless of what anyone else has done. So the next time someone pushes your buttons, tries to provoke you, or leaves you with a pain you didn't ask for, pause, breathe, and remember, you don't have to become like them to be free from them. In fact, the most powerful thing you can do is to rise silently, peacefully, and walk away. Still yourself. That's not surrender. That's victory. 6. Double quotes. Emotions are the first battlefield. Master them, and you've already won half the war. It's easy to think of revenge as a strategy, a clever response, or even a necessary act. But the Stoics say frankly, anyone who's ever lived through deep betrayal will tell you something different. The first real enemy isn't them. It's not the person who lied, insulted, or hurt you. It's what rises inside of you after they're gone. That storm behind your ribs, the tightness in your jaw, the fire in your gut that screams, do something. That's your emotion calling the shots. And if you're not careful, it will build your next move before you even have time to breathe. I want you to imagine something. You're walking down the street. Someone bumps into you. Hard. No apology. They look at you with disdain and keep walking. Now, you have a choice. Do you react? Do you yell, run after them, teach them a lesson? Or do you pause, take one breath, and keep walking knowing that their chaos doesn't belong to you? That pause, my friend, is where freedom lives. The Stoic philosophers called this the space between stimulus and response. Epictetus, who was born a slave and rose to become one of the greatest minds in history, once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you respond to it that matters." And let's be clear, reaction and response are not the same. Reaction is your amygdala talking, that ancient part of your brain built for survival, not wisdom. It reacts fast. It wants revenge, retaliation, release. It's what makes you send that angry text at 2 a.m. It's what causes road rage, shouting matches, silent treatments, and it always feels powerful in the moment. But later, when your heart slows down, you realize you've handed over your dignity for the illusion of control. A Stoic doesn't do that. A Stoic responds. They wait. They assess. They choose. Because real strength isn't about being unshakable, it's about being anchored. Even when the waves rise. I once had a friend, let's call him Jonathan. Quiet man, thoughtful. He went through a brutal divorce. His ex dragged his name through the dirt, lied in court, even tried to turn their daughter against him. Everyone expected Jonathan to fight dirty, to lash out, to show up at her door and explode. But he didn't. He wrote her no angry emails. He didn't argue on social media. Instead, he journaled. He meditated. He worked with a therapist. And every time he wanted to react, he asked himself, what will this cost me? Not just money, but peace, self-respect, sleep. He told me once, the moment I let her pull me into her storm, I'd become the person she claimed I was. So, he chose peace. Not because he was weak, but because he was strong enough to stop bleeding where it no longer made sense to bleed. That's not passivity. That's sovereignty. The modern world celebrates outrage, clickbait, instant clapbacks, but wisdom whispers. It tells you to slow down, to protect your energy, to pick your battles with surgical precision. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher, king, faced betrayal, war, political plots, and still, he wrote in his journal, You always own the option of having no opinion. There's never a need to get worked up. Things themselves don't hurt us. Our opinions about things do. Now pause, read that again. Things themselves don't hurt us. Our opinions about things do. You lose a job. A person insults you. A partner leaves. Are those facts? Yes. But how you let those facts sit inside you, that's where the damage begins or ends. And here's the truth. Your first emotional response is rarely your wisest one. So don't trust the first impulse. Don't answer when your hands are shaking. Don't speak when your pride is bleeding. Don't act from the wound. Act from the healed version of you. The version who knows that nothing anyone says or does should control your inner world. That's what the Stoics believed, that true power comes from self-governance. You don't win by reacting louder. You win by being so rooted that their chaos no longer reaches you. But I get it, it's hard. Sometimes you want to scream, to prove they were wrong, to drag their name through the same dirt they smeared you with. I've been there. I've written the speech in my head, replayed the scene 100 times with better comebacks. But every time I let emotion lead, I lost something more important than the argument. I lost myself. And so I learned what every Stoic eventually understands. Some wars are not worth fighting, especially the ones that cost you your peace. So, what does strength look like? It looks like silence when provoked. It looks like walking away with your head high when others expect you to fight. It looks like forgiving not because they deserve it, but because you refuse to carry their poison in your veins. It looks like saying, "This is not mine," and leaving their chaos at their feet. And you know what happens when you live like that? You become untouchable. They throw jabs. You don't flinch. They lie. You don't correct. They provoke. You don't perform. And slowly, their power over you dissolves, because control was never in their hands. It was always in yours. So if you're carrying anger right now, pause. Ask yourself, what would it look like if I didn't react? What would it feel like to stand in the middle of that emotional storm and not be moved? That, my friend, is where the work begins. That's where you build the kind of character that not only survives betrayal but outgrows it. That's where you stop being a prisoner of your impulses and start becoming the master of your life. So no, strength doesn't scream. It doesn't slam doors. It doesn't clap back. It pauses. It breathes. It chooses. And in that choice you become free. Free from their power. Free from your past. Free from the version of you who needed revenge to feel strong. Now, you don't need revenge. You've got peace. And that is the kind of strength no one can take away. 7. You don't need to say a word to win. All you need is not to react. There's a quiet kind of power that rarely makes headlines. It doesn't come with raised voices or clever comebacks. It doesn't seek to dominate a room or win a debate. It comes when you choose not to react, when provoked, insulted, challenged, and yet you remain still. That stillness, that's where strength lives. I want you to think about a time someone tried to push your buttons. Maybe it was in a meeting, maybe during a family argument. They said something calculated, a sharp comment wrapped in sarcasm, just to see if you'd break. And for a moment, your chest tightened, your thoughts raced, your ego wanted to speak, but instead, you stayed calm, and in that moment, without lifting a finger or raising your voice, you flipped the entire dynamic. Because now they're left with nothing to work with, no reaction, no energy to feed. Their words hang in the air, unanswered, and suddenly, it's not about what they said anymore. It's about your silence. This isn't weakness. It's not avoidance. It's a high form of discipline. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire while writing reflections to himself about restraint and self-governance, said, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who did the wrong." That means don't mirror the chaos. Don't echo the insult. Don't let someone else's lack of control strip you of yours. Because here's the truth. When you react, you hand them the steering wheel to your emotional state. And no matter how justified your response may feel in the moment, once you're being pulled by your emotions, you're not the one choosing anymore. Epictetus, another Stoic, said it even more clearly. Any person capable of angering you becomes your master. That line cuts deep, doesn't it? But it's also freeing, because it reminds us we can take the power back, not by overpowering others, but by staying anchored when they try to pull us under. You've probably seen this dynamic before in relationships, romantic or otherwise. Someone pokes, they provoke, they want a reaction. Why? Because reaction is control. If they can get you to shout, cry, justify, explain, they own your attention. They become the center of your focus. But when you don't respond, when you simply observe, breathe, and remain unmoved, the energy dies there. They have nothing left to feed on. That's why silence, chosen silence, is not passive. It's an active form of self-respect. It says, you don't get to decide how I feel today. You don't get to enter my peace with your chaos. It's not about suppressing your feelings. It's about understanding that not every feeling deserves an audience. I knew a man once, let's call him Robert, who taught this to me without saying a word. He was in his late 60s, retired Navy, had seen war, grief, betrayal, things most of us only hear about in stories. But he had this presence, this calm that filled a room. One day, someone at a dinner party, younger, brash, made a jab at him, questioning his beliefs, his choices, even his past. Everyone held their breath. Robert just smiled, took a sip of his tea, and said nothing. Later, I asked him why he didn't respond. He looked at me and said, because I don't argue with people who want a reaction more than a conversation. That stuck with me. You see, not reacting isn't about being better than someone. It's about choosing what deserves your energy and what doesn't. It's about asking yourself, if I respond to this, will it bring me peace or just prolong the noise? More often than not, the answer is clear. Now, let me be honest, mastering this kind of control isn't easy. It takes practice. You'll slip up. You'll find yourself halfway through a heated text before remembering this truth. That's okay. Growth isn't perfection. It's awareness. So next time someone tries to pull you into their storm, remember you are not obligated to join. You don't owe anyone your outrage. You don't need to defend your boundaries with noise. Your silence can speak for you, and when chosen wisely, that silence is louder than any scream. Because in a world that expects you to react, staying calm is rebellion, not to dominate, but to reclaim your inner space and protect the peace you've worked so hard to build. 8. Traditional revenge is a trap. That might sound surprising at first, especially in a world where getting even is celebrated in movies, music, and even in some of our most personal conversations. We're taught that if someone wrongs us, we must respond. If they betray us, we must strike back. If they wound us, we must show them we're not to be messed with. But here's what no one tells you. Every time you make someone else's behavior the reason for your actions, you're not in control. You're reacting. You're letting them decide your mood, your energy, your next move. And even if it feels powerful in the moment, even if you win the argument, craft the perfect comeback, or one-up their insult, what you've really done is play by their rules. You haven't reclaimed your strength. You've traded it for a few seconds of satisfaction. The Stoics, those ancient philosophers who taught the art of inner strength, saw this clearly. They believed that real power is quiet. It doesn't need to retaliate. It doesn't need to prove. It simply stands. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who did the injury." That's not a slogan. It's a path. Imagine this. Someone betrays your trust, lies about you, disrespects you in a way that cuts deep. Your instinct, naturally, is to fight back, to clear your name, to show them. But what if, instead, you turned inward? What if, instead of reacting to their chaos, you chose to rebuild your peace? That's not weakness. That's mastery. Because when you act out of anger, you're not punishing them. You're punishing yourself. Your nervous system stays activated. Your thoughts spiral. You replay the incident again and again, convincing yourself that justice requires action. But that kind of justice, it doesn't set you free. It chains you to their behavior. It forces you to carry them everywhere you go, like a ghost haunting your peace. And the longer you carry that grudge, the more it becomes a part of you. It clouds your thinking, colors your conversations, and steals time you could have used to heal. The person who hurt you might be long gone, but your mind keeps dragging them back. You deserve better than that. Let me tell you something I learned from experience, not theory. A few years ago, I was betrayed by someone I considered a close friend. They twisted my words, tarnished my name, and left me with a choice, fight back or let go. Every cell in my body wanted to respond. I drafted messages. I imagined confrontations. I rehearsed monologues in the shower, but then I paused. I sat with my own discomfort. I asked myself, who would I be doing this for? The truth. Not for justice, not for clarity. I'd be doing it for ego, and ego has never brought me peace. So I did the harder thing. I let it go. I didn't post. I didn't retaliate. I just stepped back and moved forward with my life, quietly, intentionally. At first, it felt like defeat, but over time, I realized something profound. I hadn't lost. I'd won something far more valuable than a battle of words. I'd won my freedom, and that's what the Stoics meant. Seneca once said, "He who takes revenge for a slight is like a man who heals a scratch by cutting off his arm." Revenge, the kind that comes from pain, always takes more than it gives. But what if you redefined revenge entirely? What if your revenge was your growth? What if your comeback was peace? What if your silence wasn't surrender, but sovereignty? Because the truth is, the moment you stop reacting, you stop living in their story. You stop playing a character. In their drama, you return to your own script, your own voice, your own path. This doesn't mean you suppress your feelings. Feel them, all of them. Acknowledge the anger, the hurt, the betrayal. But don't let those emotions hijack your direction. Let them inform you, not define you. There's a quote I return to often. Let them miss the old you, the one that kept showing up, kept caring, kept reacting. Let them wonder why the silence feels heavier than the noise ever did. That's not revenge. That's evolution. So, the next time you're wronged, and there will be a next time, ask yourself, do I want justice? Or do I want peace? Do I want to win? Or do I want to grow? Because the path of traditional revenge might feel powerful for a moment, but the path of inner mastery, that stays with you for life. And if you ask me, there's no sweeter victory than becoming the kind of person who doesn't need revenge to feel whole. 9. Forgiveness is not about them. That might sound strange at first. After all, we've been taught that forgiveness is a gift, something we give to others when they apologize, when they make things right, when they deserve it. But what if that belief is holding us hostage? What if, all this time, we've misunderstood forgiveness as a reward we hand out, when, in fact, it's a release we grant ourselves? See, forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. It's not pretending it never happened. It's not erasing the pain. And it's certainly not an invitation for them to walk back into your life like nothing happened. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean trust is restored. Sometimes, it doesn't even require a conversation. Forgiveness is personal. It's quiet. It's invisible to the outside world. But internally, it's everything. I want you to imagine something. You're walking through your day carrying a heavy backpack. It's filled with stones, each one representing a grudge, a betrayal, a moment where someone hurt you and never made it right. You don't remember putting all the weight there, but it's there, and it's exhausting. Some days, it slows you down. Other days, it makes you bitter. You lash out. You isolate. You harden. And then one day, you realize the person who hurt you, they're not carrying any of this. You are. That's what unforgiveness does. It gives them power there, not even using. It ties your peace to their remorse. And in the waiting, your soul begins to suffocate. I can tell you this from personal experience. I once held on to a hurt for nearly a decade. Every time their name came up, my stomach would tighten. My heart would race. I'd relive old conversations, rehearsing what I should have said, what I would say if I saw them now. I told myself I was strong for remembering, for never letting it go. But in reality, I was stuck. I wasn't standing tall. I was frozen in place. The day I forgave them, nothing dramatic happened. I didn't make a speech. I didn't send a message. I didn't even tell anyone. But I sat in silence and whispered to myself, this doesn't get to take up space in me anymore. And something inside me let go, not because they apologized, not because they deserved it, but because I did. I deserved to be free. The Stoics understood this. Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. That includes pain. That includes betrayal. That includes the people who never said sorry. When you forgive, You don't free them from accountability. You free yourself from captivity. You remove the hook from your heart. Now, let's be clear. Forgiveness doesn't make what happened okay. It doesn't remove your right to feel grief, anger, or sadness. But it does remove your need to carry those emotions endlessly. It says, I acknowledge the wound, but I won't let it own me. Some people think forgiveness is weakness, that it means letting people get away with what they've done. But that's not true. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's strength. It takes far more courage to release resentment than to rehearse revenge. It takes far more power to lay down the burden than to keep dragging it just to prove a point. And here's the deeper truth. Some people will never understand what they did to you. They'll never see your side. They'll never change. And waiting for that day to come is a prison of your own making. Forgiveness says, even if you never change, I will. It says, your harm won't define my healing. Psychologically, holding a grudge activates stress centers in your brain. It raises cortisol levels. It shortens your breath. It affects sleep. It keeps your nervous system in a loop of hypervigilance. The body doesn't know you're replaying a memory. It thinks it's happening again. That's the cost of unforgiveness. You re-injure yourself over and over. But when you forgive, studies show that your heart rate lowers, your immune function improves, you think more clearly, you sleep more deeply, you feel lighter, not just metaphorically, but physically. That's not coincidence. That's liberation. You know, Marcus Aurelius said, the happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. Forgiveness is choosing better thoughts. It's refusing to rehearse old wounds as if they're the only song in your playlist. I'm not saying you should rush it. Forgiveness takes time. It's not linear. Some days, you feel healed. Other days, the memory comes back sharper than ever. That's okay. Healing is a process, not a switch. But every step you take toward releasing that pain, even if it's small, is a victory. Sometimes people ask me, how do I know when I've truly forgiven? And my answer is simple. When you can think of them without anger gripping your chest. When you stop waiting for them to feel what you felt. When their presence or absence no longer defines your peace. That's when you know. So, if there's someone you've been carrying, someone who still lives rent-free in your head and heart, ask yourself, what is it costing me to hold on? And more importantly, what would it feel like to finally put it down? You don't have to tell them. You don't have to understand them. You don't even have to like them. But you can forgive them for your sake. Because peace isn't something they give you. It's something you give yourself. And that's the deepest act of self-respect there is. Dear friend, we grow up with a dramatic idea of revenge. Striking back, proving our worth, making them pay. But Stoicism teaches us something quieter, deeper. True revenge is not reaction, but transcendence. Because the most powerful revenge is living so well that they can no longer reach you. Your success, your peace, your growth, that's your quiet triumph. Not everyone deserves to know your story. Holding your silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom. You don't owe anyone an explanation. You don't owe pain another echo. When you choose not to react, you reclaim something priceless, your self-control. Forgiveness isn't because they deserve it. It's because you do. You deserve peace. You deserve freedom from the weight they left behind. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It just stops it from owning your future. Emotions are the first battlefield. If you allow anger to lead, you lose yourself. But if you respond with awareness, you don't get pulled into their chaos. You lead yourself out of it. Stoicism reminds us, don't become like those who harmed you. You don't have to fight to win. Just grow so tall, they fade beneath you. True power isn't loud. It's calm, unshakable, and undeniable. And if you've started walking that path, the quiet, steady one, then I invite you to walk it with us. Join a community that chooses clarity over drama, strength over noise, peace over revenge. Subscribe to this channel and grow alongside others who are done reacting and ready to rise. Because you don't need to get even. You just need to become untouchable.